Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast. We're going to jump right in with a wonderful guest today, Sheriff Chris Nocco. Let me read you a little bit about him. Chris is the sheriff of Pasco County, a position that he has held since former Florida Governor Rick Scott appointed him in 2011. He was elected to the position then in 2012, and then he was reelected not once but twice in 2016 and 2020 without any opposition. Prior to becoming the sheriff, he worked in the Pasco County Sheriff's Office as a major and a captain. He also, listen to this, his dad was, as you'll learn, was a Philadelphia police officer. And so Chris has served with the Philadelphia Public School Police, the Fairfax County Police Department in Virginia, and the Broward County Sheriff's Office, and was a first responder to the attacks of 9/11, Washington, D.C. sniper, and the anthrax attacks. And we're going to talk about that today. Really, I'm going to kind of take it there and give my own addition to Chris's bio and why I wanted him on the show. You know, I've told most of you, I've announced on here that I'm moving away from the national security, counterterrorism stuff because I feel like I've done what I can do to be relevant to this problem set. I'm really not in that space anymore. I've run a lot of miles there, but it's not where my heart is, honestly. But Chris and I met in the context of the whole Gathering Storm piece, and one of the things that struck me right away is he is both a strategist and a tactician. He is a visionary, and what he's doing, honestly, to flatten communications and build networks around problem sets, not just terrorism, but anything dealing that's a wicked, ill-structured problem. He is really a visionary for where things are heading in terms of law enforcement and the private-public partnerships that need to go with it. You hear me talk about this all the time. I talk about it in the Gathering Storm. He embodies it. And what he's doing at a community level for community connection with, again, law enforcement and citizens and others, first responders, fire. It's a best practice, man. I've never seen anything quite like it. So without any further ado, let me let you look for yourselves. Let's jump right in with our interview with Sheriff Chris Nocco. I'll see you over there. Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast, where we connect like our lives depend on it. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast. Sheriff Chris Nocco. Man, this has been a long time coming. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. Right. You and I have had the opportunity to hang out on different occasions, and, you know, I feel like we met around the what we're calling the Gathering Storm.
Right.
You know, what I will say is your insights in the work that you're doing in law enforcement, actually in just leadership, I think are really what we need to be focusing on today. And so I want to kind of have some conversations around that. Everybody's, you know, got your intro going into the show, but let me just, in your own words, tell us a little bit about yourself and, you know, your journey through law enforcement and what brought you, you know, to the seat you're sitting in today.
Right. Well, I would say, you know, it all begins because our Lord Jesus Christ. I have a very deep faith. Everything, you know, I think God has a path for every one of us, and that path, you never know where it's going to turn out. You never know. I'm a kid from Philadelphia. I grew up in the city of Philadelphia. My dad was a retired Philadelphia police captain, and I'm a sheriff in Florida. Like, you never would have this journey, but like it took me to different places and saw different things, and you know, grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood. Everyone in my neighborhood, they're either cops, firemen, or they're roofers and labor workers. I mean, we were blue-collar. We had a great childhood growing up, my brother, my sister, and my parents. It was unbelievable. I ended up, got blessed. I was played football in college, had great friends, great teammates there. Started in the public school police in Philly. And, you know, I always wanted to work the street. You know, wanted to emulate my dad in some sort. He was being a cop. And so ended up in Fairfax County, Virginia.
Right.
And it's just amazing that, you know, I was there to see things that, you know, probably not many people got saw. I was there for the attacks on 9/11. I was there for mass demonstrations in D.C. I was there for the anthrax attacks. I was there during the sniper incident.
Wow.
But then God brought a beautiful woman in my life, my wife. She's a Floridian. She saw this stuff coming from the sky that was white and it was cold and it was called snow. And she's like, I don't want to do this. And I'm like, I got it. So then ended up in Broward with her, was with the Broward deputy for a little bit. Then got into politics. Worked on a presidential campaign. Worked for now Secretary of State Rubio, but he was a Speaker of the House. I still had that bug to get in law enforcement. And I said, my wife has been extremely supportive, said, got it. Went into Pasco, moved up, and then was blessed by Governor Scott to become the sheriff and been reelected. But I always go back to it. Blessed by God to have everything to open, the doors that open up for me, and to have family and a wife that has supported me this whole journey.
What's been your biggest takeaway in your journey of law enforcement? Like, what's that one thing that you kind of hold true to that guides you today as sheriff?
So I think the big thing is, for our people is supporting them. It takes a unique individual, whether it's somebody in the military, somebody in law enforcement, fire rescue, whatever. It takes a unique individual to have that spirit in you to want to go into situations that most people run out of.
Yeah.
It takes that spirit in you to want to serve other people. I mean, there's something inside you. So it's always been, we have to support that person. We have to, give them the equipment, everything they need it. The other part has been innovation. And I think innovation has become even more critical today.
Yeah.
We have Moore's Law where technology advances so much faster. I think the same with law enforcement and public safety and probably the military. The advancements are so quick, but at the same time, you can't take away the human being is the one that actually makes it happen. But technology is what's going to support us in that mission.
Yeah, and everybody watching or listening to this right now, I can tell you firsthand, as a former special operator, spending time with Sheriff Nocco and his crew, watching what they do to keep their county safe. Man, there's some best practices going on that we need to be talking about and learning from, and we're gonna pull that apart today. Yeah. I know you're a humble guy, but I do want to illuminate some of the things that y'all are doing because I think it really is important. Before we do that, though, I think one of the, as you know, we just released the Gathering Storm book, and I even just in the sequence that this podcast will come out, I had pretty much said that was my tip of the hat to the counterterrorism thing. And I'm moving back into storytelling, human connection, healing stuff that I've been doing for years. But I also said in that podcast, there's a few outlying tasks still to be done. And one of them was to really sit down with you and get some perspective on local law enforcement and how that threads into federal, how that threads into leadership, community levels. How do we come together around all this stuff, around this gathering storm of potential terror threats? And when you and I were talking for coffee that time, the first time we met, you said something really profound to me. And it was around, we were talking about how, the growing terror threat that's out there could look a lot like October 7 instead of 9/11, and in other words, localized complex attacks where we live, work, and play, right? New Orleans at scale, right? Or God forbid, the Mandalay shooting in Vegas at scale. Right. And you said to me, Scott, I've actually kind of seen both of those. I saw 9/11 up close, and I saw the DC sniper and the way those affected humans. And I wonder if you would mind maybe talking about that a little bit, because I think it really sets the tone for what we've got to be thinking about here.
Right. So, two very tragic incidents and unique in their own ways. So 9/11, as I said, I was a Fairfax County cop, great organization. And I was living in Pentagon City at the time. For those that are military, you probably know the area, 23rd Street,
know it well.
Right there in Pentagon City. And so I'll never forget, the planes had gone in to the Pentagon. And so you can see the smoke, you see the fire. I was living with a bunch of cops at the time. So we grabbed our gear. I'll never forget, we're like, first thing is, okay, what are we going to do? So we're like, we got to get to our station. So we were stationed in Alexandria, Mount Vernon district. So we had to go right down the Parkway there. But it was interesting because right before we get to the Parkway, when you're going down, you're about to hit the ramp, but you got Reagan Airport right there. Yeah. And I'll never forget, at Reagan Airport, the roads just blocked. So you're in Pentagon City, the roads are blocked, congested beyond compare. I'll never forget this airport cop. She comes running down a ramp, and she's like, everybody, out of your cars, out of your cars. So everybody ducks out of their cars. We have our gear on. We're like, what the heck is happening there? And they said, there's a plane coming in. So there was supposed to be we all thought, the plane's about to crash into us right now. We all duck under our cars. I remember myself going, I'm underneath a car. What is this going to really protect me from? But there was nowhere to go. Like you were running into a building with glass, or you were going to be underneath the car. And then about 10, 15 minutes later, they gave an all clear. Later on, we found out that was Flight 93. So they had gone off the radar. They didn't know where it was. It crashed in Pennsylvania. They didn't know that, but they thought it was coming in on us.
Coming into D.C.
That day, we got sent to Belvoir, and you talk about bureaucracy. This is the problem with government. There's just so much. Instead of like just reacting and thinking and doing the job, they got caught up in bureaucracy. So they sent us to Fort Belvoir, and we're working the gates with the MPs, and we're checking cars because we're thinking the base is going to get attacked. I'll never forget. We got a call on the radio. They're like, "Hey, you got to get off that. You got to get off that post." And so later on, we're like, "Why'd you pull us off that post?" And they said, "Well, we're afraid if you found drugs in the car that there would be a jurisdictional issue." And I'm laughing. I go, "Are you guys crazy? We're waiting to get it. We just got attacked. We see the Pentagon's burning, and you're worried about us finding drugs in the car." I'm like, "This is ridiculous." But what happened was we ended up going to the train station, the metro stop. So we're at the metro stop, guns out. We're basically there just to make people feel good that hey, they see us. But then it turns out later on, like we talked about, we started getting our calls started going up. And so we're like, what's going on? So we had a robbery, we had different things going on. We stopped some kid, and I'm like, we caught him as a suspect in the case. And we're like, what are you doing? Do you not know, like, we're under attack? And he's like, what do you mean we're under attack? And I'm like, the Pentagon's burning. You can see that we're on point. You can see the fire coming up. And he's like, oh, we just thought there was a fire in DC. But it was amazing that life was still going. The McDonald's was still open. Things were still happening. And even though the airport was shut down and the fighters were flying over us, breaking the sound barrier, people were just kind of living their lives.
Getting McDonald's, some committing crimes.
Yeah, no,
it was a spectacular attack in the horrible.
Right.
But it had, and when I say spectacular, I'm meaning that in the context of that was an effect, right? That Bin Laden wanted. It was the spectacular attack that the nation paid attention to. But what you're saying is, Pentagon's burning right over here locally. People are kind of going back to their lives.
Yeah, they were just kind of like, it didn't affect me, and they're just like, it's happening over there, not here. So they just kind of were living their lives. And it was one of those things and then I remember at night, we went down to the Pentagon because we had people that were bringing shipments of load and protecting. And that's when being right there, that's when it really hits you like, wow, you can see the Pentagon destroyed at that point. Cause I used to jog around that part. But then getting to your point, during the sniper incident, that was the DC sniper. So
2002.
It was almost like a year right afterwards.
Right.
Which a lot of people were saying, hey, is this terrorist? Like, was this kind of anniversary issue? That was 3 weeks. And I remember, the first shooting occurred, I think it was four people killed that day up in Montgomery County. And then everybody's like, okay, hey, there's something going on here. As this thing progressed within several days, life changed in the DC metropolitan area. I mean, I think anybody who lived there realized you started seeing tarps over the gas station. Like people were hiding to put tarps. They were canceling kids' sports. Parents were literally running with their kid from the car to run them into the school.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And everybody, like people would, I think it was almost like if they had Uber Eats at the time, Uber Eats would have made a killing because they thought during COVID, people didn't leave their houses. Nobody would leave their house during that time unless it was go to work or go home.
And to clarify, this was two individuals in the back of shooting from the back of a vehicle and then moving. Right. Like they would shoot and then they would move. Locked down not just an entire city, but the surrounding area for weeks.
Oh, yeah.
And then you had 9/11, 19 hijackers, but specific hijackers on a plane crash into a building, an iconic building. And while it was horrific right there, DC life pretty much went on.
Oh, yeah. And I don't know what the economic impact. I know for 9/11, they talk about the flights and those type of things. But for the sniper in the Beltway, you were literally talking from Baltimore to Richmond was in lockdown. Everybody was in fear. I can imagine, how that slowed down the economy. But, the loss of life, the fear that people had. And you're right, it was two people. They had a Caprice. I remember it was always, and we can talk about the intelligent failures and talk about the radio issue. Comms is probably something we never fixed it since 9/11. We never fixed it in the sniper. We never fixed it now. It's still a comms issue.
Yeah.
Agencies communicating together. But I can tell you during that time, it was just two people, and it was supposed to be a white guy in a white truck in a white van,
right.
But it turned out the suspects were black. They were in a Caprice, and they were shooting at the back. And I remember they were showing the pictures. It was so low cost.
Right.
So, I mean, and as I said, anybody could have done this, and anybody did do it.
And even like Sean Ryan and I talked about when I was on with him one time, we talked about, it was I think it was roughly $500,000 for 9/11. And you think about the money that's been going to the Taliban and indirectly Al Qaeda and other groups in the millions. If they did that with 500,000, imagine what they could do with the millions. But you take this is yard sale level expenditures, locking down a city. And here's my point on this, Chris, and this is what's been on my mind for a while, and I think you and I have discussed it, is, what we're talking about and what we're about to talk about is not classified information. And this is not stuff where what we're about to, at least my experience has been, when we start to talk about it, where you go, oh, shh. We don't want the bad guys to think of that, because if you and I are talking about this, the general rule on this shit is they've long since been going down this road. I mean, do you agree with that?
100%. And that's the one thing. And I know, your background, my background, we talk about things, and there'll be people that watch this podcast and I can't believe they're saying this. They're giving people ideas. They have all you have to do is have Google, and you don't have to have ideas. You could just type in stuff, and things will start popping up and showing up. So the things we talk about aren't secrets. At the same time, is they need to be talked about, because if we can't address them, if we can't address the simple things, what are we going to do when complex issues start coming up?
100%. Exactly. And complex attacks, I think, are what we're looking at here. So you took the DC sniper thing. Granted, that was challenging, but imagine, and I said this in the Gathering Storm book, imagine that employment of that sniper system, shoot and move, in conjunction with a Mandalay shooting, positioned where people are coming out or first responders are going in, a complex attack, multinodal. And so one of the things that I kind of want to get into here is, as you said, the DC sniper really locked everything down. One of the things that we've said in Gathering Storm is, if you look at what the levels of attacks that have happened over the last several years, the 9/11, again, spectacular effect attack has really not been, I mean, there've been a few, but what you're starting to see is an alarming trend of localized complex attacks where people live, work, and play. And, one of the, even if you don't agree with Sarah Adams' analysis or, Legend's analysis or mine on the threat, right? Even if you think that what the Afghan allies are saying to us is not right, and the IC who's getting their intel from Haqqani and, whatever is spot on. Just looking at the trends of emerging attacks is very alarming. What are your thoughts on that? Because you're a smart guy, you have an incredible intel team. Like, as you just look at the series of attacks over the last few years with terrorism internationally, what's on your mind?
So those are the type of things where we're constantly looking, like, you just had the attack in India.
Yes, sir.
They, low dollar amount of money used for people to go in there with guns and shoot people. So we're constantly evaluating that. We see whether, it's school attacks, like that. It was people in a park. And so we're constantly evaluating, saying, okay, there's threats in our country. There's threats from overseas. We know that there's sympathizers here in this country. There's people here in this country we don't even know about.
Have to be.
And so, we're an open. We were an open country for 4 years where people just poured in. So we're just constantly dealing with that. Our biggest thing, and one is there's an issue, and in the intelligence world, I understand where they constantly, it has to meet this level, and they have all these different hoops to verify. And I get it; it's good that we verify information to create intelligence. At the same time, it's good just to share information, because little pieces can help us solve puzzles. And so, from our standpoint in law enforcement, I get it. We're the local law enforcement. The information shares a different way. And for our standpoint, we're always trying to share just information with each other, because who knows what we have? Who knows what, Hillsborough may have, Pinellas may have, and just sharing little things. But for us, it's also, we also have to be constantly reactive, and that's the one thing that, from a tactical standpoint, from a training standpoint, we never know what that threat's going to be. We never know when that bad day is going to be. So we're always in a training mode to be reactive to whether, God forbid, it's a school threat, whether it's somebody using fentanyl as a mass casualty. It's constantly thinking, okay, how would we respond to the situation? So it's training our members to be able to think critically in those situations, come up with a plan, and we don't know what the attack may be, but to constantly be prepared for anything that hits us.
And you're doing it. I mean, I went out to at Sheriff Nocco's invitation, graciously invited me to come out to the Pasco
Parade.
Pasco
Yes.
Parade. I was invited to go out, and it was on the heels of obviously the New Year's Day attack in New Orleans. We have Gasparilla here in the kind of the same time frame, and they're very kind of Mardi Gras-esque type parades. And in your area, you know, the way that you have, so I went out there and I sat in your tactical operations center. I observed real-time intel synthesis. I observed the way that you all, because what I was, let me just tell you what I was impressed with, and then I'd like to hear your philosophy on this, because I think what you did, honestly, is an incubator for what we could pull apart. And if there is indeed a threat on the horizon, an October 7 style attack, or even a lone wolf doing some version of what happened on January 1st, what you all are doing, what impressed me is, you know, Americans have certain things that we like to do that make us uniquely American.
Right.
And those kinds of parades make us uniquely Americans. And I've heard calls that we need to shut those things down. We need to stop doing that. It's too much of a risk. And while I understand the tactical concerns about that and the strategic concerns, what struck me as so impressive was the level of effort that you all put into the fact that, no, we're going to have this parade. Folks are going to feel safe, and they're going to celebrate being Americans, and they're going to celebrate being in Pasco County, and all of those things. And the work that y'all put into that to let that happen, I mean, I was super impressed. Can you just kind of talk about what your, because I mean, I've never seen anything like it. What's your philosophy on that? How do you approach that? Because I think there's a lot of best practices there.
So yeah, no, and it goes back to, we're blessed with a great team and good partnerships, and so it goes back to your main point, is that Americans cannot fear. If we fear and we stop being who we are, then we're not America anymore.
Yeah,
we're not the country that people want to be a part of, and knows that when, I won't say the word, but when it hits the fan, America stands up. That's the thing that makes us America. And the nice thing about Floridians is that, you know, we go through hurricanes, like we go through storms, we go through things. And as Floridians, we recognize that, hey, nothing's going to knock us down. We're always going to stand up. So, you know, I'm very proud of who we are as Americans, and as Floridians and as law enforcement, we have to have those values. Yeah. The nice thing as being a sheriff is that I report directly to the citizens. I don't report to a mayor. I don't report to a council. I don't report to a manager. I report to the citizens. Yeah. So there is no political correctness. There's no, well, you know, let's figure this out. You know, it's, you know, what's the polling say? It's like, there's no polling. We're going to be Americans. We're going to be Floridians. And Pasco is the third largest parade in the Tampa Bay region. And so we knew what happened in down in New Orleans. And so we saw different things that were happening. So like, okay, and every year we've been kind of escalating. Okay, let's keep getting better. Let's keep getting better. And so the nice thing is we have a mixture in our sheriff's office. We have people that have risen through the ranks in law enforcement. We have those that came in from the military that have served overseas with yourself and others. And so they've seen these horrible things that can happen over there. And so we're always preparing for worst case scenarios. So we have multi-layers. One is great partnership with the City of Newport Richey Police Department, with their fire department, and with our county fire. Like we are hand in hand serving together. Yeah. The other one too is we brought in the state guard. So Governor DeSantis created a state guard. They have a special missions unit. They were riding with Humvees with our guys. And so we had several layers. We have guys that are in plain clothes, undercover, walking the crowd. We have snipers on the rooftops that many people probably didn't even see, but they were along the whole route. We have guys that are out there with the ARs slung. We want to make a visible presence so people see, like, okay, you're not going to mess around in our county. Yep. There will be a very swift response. We have drones up, helicopters. We have multi-layers, and we're prepared, whether it's, God forbid, a chemical weapon, whether it's a lone wolf with a gun, to try to, you know, we're going to stop that person. You know, you can't prevent everything, and we try to prevent through intelligence and working with different groups. But at the same time, is you can't stop somebody from taking those actions. But at the same time, we're ready to defend the community, defend those people. But it takes months of planning ahead of time. And, you know, we're going to constantly do things next year that are going to be different than this year, because you don't want, and we know there's people that are out there probing us. We know people watch us to see how we respond to things. It's like swatting calls. They're seeing how we respond to see what we do. So we constantly are trying to get improved, but then also we don't want to give these people, oh, this is how they cookie cut every year. They do this. We constantly evolve to whatever threats going on around the world, but to make ourselves better in what we do.
It was just, I loved it. I spent a couple of tours in operations centers overseas. I ran a battalion level operations center in Afghanistan. I ran a Siege Sotif, which is like a joint special ops center, and even an interagency one. And one of the things that I learned in that process was the importance of synthesis and fusion and functionality. Like it's one thing to sit down a bunch of people with weapons and look tough.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot of that in the country these days. But it's another thing to be completely synthesized and fused and functional. And what I I went out, saw the route, saw everything, but then spending time in the talk with your analysts, that was when I honestly felt just really blown away by what you'd done, because their level of real-time fusion, real-time synthesis, real-time comms with the guys and girls out there on the street, I hadn't seen that, honestly, since I got out of the military.
So it's a great point. Honestly, we have our analysts are unbelievable. They are great, and it's interesting because when we first got in there in the sheriff's office, the analysts, they called themselves analysts, but they weren't doing analytical work. I mean, they were literally like just getting paper, stapling things, but they weren't doing analytical work. So then we started realizing, okay, we need analysts, and there's multiple layers why you need analysts. One is, they're a force multiplier.
Yeah.
They help put cases together. They help the deputies on patrol. And that's probably primary where we see our biggest benefit, the analysts, is that deputies are riding to a call for service. As they're going for a call for service, the analyst is typing in the information, finding out where they're going, what they're doing, who the people are at the site. And then that's providing real-time information for that deputy so they know what they're walking into.
That's critical work, man.
Oh, whether they know they're going into a case, they're going to a house where that guy has felony warrants for murder, or they're going to a juvenile disturbance and, hey, that kid has autism. So now it changes the mindset of the deputy to be like, okay, I know what I'm walking into. It makes it better. Then if we have a shooting or something breaks bad, these analysts are putting work together. So as literally detectives are getting on scene, there's a case of like, hey, these are our possible suspects. This is where they live. Start sending units there. It's a force multiplier, but I get it from deputies, there's always culture changes. And so I can go through a lot of the culture changes that we've done in an organization. And one of those culture changes was with the analysts, what is the analyst? We can do this work. We don't need analysts. Now it's one of those things where our members, we could not survive as an organization if we didn't have the analysts that were helping us do the work. I
agree. And I'm not going to out the analyst because I don't want to, I know he does his thing. He was so competent and like we were having conversations about ISIS and Al Qaeda and like I did not expect the level of knowledge that this cat would have and the fidelity that he would have on it, and I mean really granular understanding from tier up here to down to like tactical employment, and at the same time was very switched on to what was happening on the ground and his comms. And so I wonder if you could maybe talk a little, because you one of the things we suggest in the Gathering Storm is when we look at these localized attacks, if they happen, like a big lessons learned has been the need for the law enforcement and first responders to understand the scope of what you're dealing with here. These are individuals most likely who are quite prepared to die. They are likely highly trained and efficient at what they do. And they are going to throw things at you you've probably never seen before. Even if you've been through a horrible school shooting, those are usually single shooters. You're talking about 8 to 9 to 10 dudes that are highly trained and are going to bring everything at you and come right at you. The way that you've integrated special ops veterans, Marines, others into your force, but not only just brought them in, they have a voice and they have a say. Can you talk about that and how that's affected the culture of your department?
Oh yeah, no, and absolutely. And it's interesting, so I know many of your listeners were Googling, where's Pasco County? Where is this person? So, just a little familiarity.
Yeah, tell us about the county.
Yeah, a little bit of county. So we are just north, we butt up to the city of Tampa at some points. We're on the Gulf of America, so we actually have about 25 miles of the Gulf. We're probably about to 750,000 residents. So it used to be a lot of agriculture, but it's changing. The population has been booming over the years. Right now it's growing to be a diverse community too, with different people from all around the world. And one key thing where people should recognize, where I don't think they may realize in the Tampa Bay region is that we have McDill here. So McDill's here. So we have a lot of people with special operations. You have a lot of people that have very high secret clearances. And so some of them may live in Pasco County.
Yeah.
And so we recognize bad people sometimes are around, they want to infiltrate. They want to find out where people live. So, there's a lot of things that we look at within our county from security standpoints. The one thing we are blessed because we have McDill here is that we have a lot of people that retired out that still had the bug. They want to be involved. They want to be engaged. They want to do something. And so we were able to bring them on as a training capacity. And eventually some came on as sworn, promoted through the ranks. And the biggest thing for our profession and public safety, I think probably the military, is you have to be open-minded. You have to be able to think outside the box.
Right.
You can't just, this is the way we've always done things, because the world is changing so rapidly. You can't do things the way they've always been done.
Yeah.
And people are always going to copycat. They're always going to learn. So, it all started for law enforcement. Columbine was a big game changer with school security, tactics, going in there, and anybody in law enforcement realized, remember, they used to say, wait at the door for SWAT. Well, then we realized that was a horrible mistake. You don't wait at the door for SWAT. Then it was wait for 3 other people and you do the diamond formation, you go into school. And it's like, don't wait, you just charge in. So that was one of the things that we learned. Multiple shooters coming into situations, we're learning different tactics because whether it's homegrown extremists, whether it's somebody from overseas that are coming here to do something bad, they're going to change their tactics. How we've been blessed, I think, in our country that we have not had a multiple shooter attack like in Mumbai. Whether it was, like I said, an overseas terrorist organization like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or somebody homegrown, I'm surprised and thank God that we haven't. But those are the type of things because we know anybody's plan is to overwhelm a system.
Yeah.
And so that's from our standpoint is always training. How do we deal with the situation that if, God forbid, there's a shooting at a location, but then at the same time is be prepared for second and third order effects of what else can happen. And so that's whether it's a hurricane, whether it's the grid goes down, or whether it's an active shooter at multiple locations, we're constantly trying to figure out to learn. But the good thing is, like I said, we have people who came from the special operations, and we have people who came from all different branches of the military, and what they've learned overseas and what they've learned. I mean, think about the military's given you all millions of dollars in training. Why should not local law enforcement and local fire rescue use that to say, look, you've learned so much. You know how to do these things. Teach us, because I'll tell you, we don't have all the money. There's some organizations, like there's some big cities, they can write checks for anything. Like they get a lot of money. We're a local sheriff's office. Our budget, it's not something where we can just do whatever we want. We can make mistakes and buy things. And we have to be precise because we also remember the taxpayer. We report to the taxpayers. And every dollar, like they thought Doge was critical in federal government. We've been doing Doge for years where we know where every dollar is spent.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I will tell you, the other thing too is when at the parade, it didn't feel like some kind of overt, heavyweight presence that was just intimidating. It didn't feel that. It didn't have that feel to me. Right. And based on what I saw, the way people were celebrating and enjoying the parade, I don't think they felt that way either. No. So there's and that's more art than science, right? That and I just think it goes to the professionalism of the department. And me, I'm not giving you platitudes like you guys brought that, and it's taken years to get you to that point. And the way like you said, you've combined guys and girls that have grown up through the ranks of law enforcement, but then operators that have come off the streets of Fallujah and Ramadi, and then you seed that right those realities in. To your point about surprised it hasn't happened. I was up in D.C. and you and I talked about this. I went up there to talk about the Gathering Storm with several senior leaders, and I've been blessed to have connections with some of them, and we've been very vocal. We're going to continue to be vocal about it. But I a very, very senior intel leader, and I mean super senior in the whole organization, told me candidly, I'm surprised that the Crocus Music Hall in Russia hasn't happened here with ISIS. Like I can't believe it hasn't happened. So when I hear that coming from a very senior analyst who I trust implicitly, I think we have to really step back, and that needs to give us, like with you saying that where you work, and then in DC it's being said. I hope leaders are listening to this. Right. So let me ask you this.
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to touch upon that point, because so we have outlet malls, we have shopping plazas in our county, and so we talk about sometimes you're blessed, sometimes you're lucky. we had a person who was prior military. He came in, American citizen, came in, called us from a McDonald's and said, I was told by the CIA to shoot up this outlet mall. And so, deputies got there and they're like, okay, what's going on, blah, blah. So they bring the individual and they, take him in and just start talking to him more like, hey, what's going on? And he started talking. He's like, no, I was told by the CIA that I've got to shoot up this place and everything. And so we started making calls to DC like, hey, does anybody know who this person is? Nobody knew who this person was. We ended up, search warrants, everything going through proper processes, went to his house. He lived on a large compound, had acres of land. We could not get on there because we started very quickly, as soon as deputies were doing the right thing, like we had tactical units that were looking and they're like, there's surveillance everywhere. We don't know what's on the ground. He had surveillance. As soon as he took a foot on the ground, there was cameras in the house that would start activating, knew it where it was. They started looking everywhere on, we had to send the robot dog in. Robot dog gets in there, clears everything. We're able to go in there. And as we go in there, our guys are like, oh my gosh, we could not believe it. He had armored vests, Kevlar everywhere, helmets and guns at every door. He had more ammunition than you can ever believe. He had armored vehicles. He had long-range guns. He had so much stuff that we were absolutely just blown away because we're like, thank God Almighty, he did not go through with his actions. So we talk about lessons learned. So then we go back to the room and we're like, okay, what would have happened had this person really done this? We would have been, now we're sending first line deputies in there. Deputies have, they have Kevlar. It's not just Kevlar for handguns. They could take rifle rounds in their Kevlar. We buy a higher level Kevlar. They have the helmets. We have the ARs. At the same time as AR versus what this guy had with 50 cal, this was not going to, these first line deputies were going through a rough situation. And so the good thing is that all of us, we were frontline deputies, we cops, we know what that feeling. So they go back to the very beginning. We know what they go through. We empathize with them. And we're one of them. Like we may be the first ones. I may be driving by that location and start hitting the fan. So at that point, we start lesson learned. We created designated marksmanship program. Sorry, I can't say it. Designated marksmanship program. So we have deputies that are trained throughout the organization at a higher level to be marksmen because whether on patrol, you have a situation where somebody is heavily armored, has this thing, you can't send deputies right up to him chest to chest because he's got you outgunned. There's no way our guys can drive around with 50 cal. But if we can, get rounds on him from further away to kind of, hold him down, then we can start using different avenues to hold them. But going back to lessons learned about like the theater in Russia, these are things that happen across the country. There's a huge mental health issue that causes this. There's a huge disgruntledness that's causing this. And so that's from our standpoint, we're always constantly thinking, how do we prepare for that? And then God forbid, when we do learn that something happened around the country, around the world, how would we have responded to it?
I love the fact that you're doing the lessons learned because what bothers me is when, my whole reason for doing the Gathering Storm piece was, there were lots of people talking about the threat, but there also are all these case studies out there, since 9/11, where if you just step back and you look at the types of attacks that have been happening by groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and you're right, homegrown ones too, they're so localized. They're so, my friend Dave, a career CIA guy, he calls it horrorism. It's worse than terrorism. It's horrorism. It absolutely creates like a level of paralysis. And it is so horrific that it just shuts everything down. And then it's amplified, right? And if you look at the trends of this, Mumbai, the Mandalay shooting, the Crocus City Music Hall, the school in Russia, right? I mean, all with the kids where they had the explosive Beslan school siege. And I just went through those with a couple of lessons learned guys, and we just broke them down. And there were some things that came out of those, Sheriff, that were really, really concerning. And then I think October 7 really punctuated those lessons. And then we saw them again in Kashmir. So what keeps you up at night when you think about what your responsibilities are and knowing what you know and just looking across the landscape at precedent of attacks? What keeps you up at night?
So there's a lot. I was gonna say, and it's interesting because we focus now we're talking about the really big events, and those are the things that keep me up at night. But remember, deputies are responding to domestic situations all day long. We're dealing with, people fighting at McDonald's because they got small fry, or they got large fry, or small fries when they ordered large fries. I mean, like, we deal with a lot. Like the day of a deputy or shift of a deputy is like crazy how it goes from things that are just like ridiculous that you're dealing with, I said, people arguing over what size fries they got, to at any moment the tones will go off. And tones for us means you hear a buzz on the sound on the radio, which means critical situation. So at any moment, these guys are going from, and women are going from, I'm dealing with a nonsense argument that is like Jerry Springer show, to the worst thing that you could ever imagine happening. So that's what I always say. Like, we always tell people, nothing's routine, stay on guard. The things that keep me up at night, I'm always, and this is things that we're planning for now, the grid going out. We deal in Florida. Like, you deal with hurricanes where there's no power. Like, our biggest thing is, our first mission is search and rescue, save people's lives, protect property. And then the next two things after that is help the power companies restore power, get the gas companies to get the gas in there, and, try to restore life. I can't imagine what Florida or any part of this country would be like with no power. Or Western Carolina lived with it for weeks.
Look at what happened in Western North Carolina. I was going to say, it's and some of the analysis coming out on it's terrifying.
Mm-hmm. And
in terms of the impact.
Right. No, and that to me, and you take that in a very highly populated area, that's a concern. The other thing that I always think about, I played a lot of sports growing up. So it's, you prepare, and then you hope that, and like Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan to get punched in the face.
Right.
So, we know our deputies are going to have to respond and react and improvise and adapt and overcome, like Gunny Highway said. But at the same time is you have to be prepared to adapt to situations, but we have to be good at what we train at. So my fear is that we train for stuff, and if that day happens and then we don't do what we train to do because something broke down. And so, using a football analogy, it's like, you train all week to run the football against the defense of another team. But then as soon as the players hit the field, they go in a shotgun formation and they're about to throw the ball. And you're like, guys, why are we throwing the ball? We've been training to run. So that's the one thing, is just when that final moment happens, something bad happens, is that the training that we've been doing constantly kicks in, and that our members go through with it, because that's the one thing I know. We can improvise to any horrible situation. We will. Grid going down really causes me concern, because there's a lot of things out of our control that we can't control it. But at the same time, it's always making sure, and that's why I give credit to our training unit. We have actually our captain of our training unit used to be a Green Beret also, and so it's constantly like, guys, train, because when that first bullets start flying and things are happening, we know you're going to have to adapt a little bit, but at least go back to your core training, because that's what's going to help you survive and succeed.
It's a hell of a lot easier to adapt than it is to create when you're under duress.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really, really great point. I kind of want to stay on this just a little bit, because one of the things that I noticed in a lot of the case studies that we did on localized attacks, and again, I think these, like you said, these could be replicated to hurricanes and other natural epic disasters, or things that are just bigger than us. I saw a lot of what I call hubris, but just arrogance, just institutional arrogance was always something that came up after the effect, where folks thought it couldn't happen to them. Right. They were ready. They didn't need to worry about that. You guys are just being tinfoil hats, whatever. And certainly in Israel, a lot of the IDF folks that I talked to, the analysts, they were all saying, the levels of hubris were just beyond the pale. Even with citizens who lived in those areas didn't think it was possible. Right. Do you see anything with leadership? Let's just start with that. And I'm not asking you to get specific, but when, the conversations that you and I have, the conversations that Sean Ryan and I have, like it seems to me like there's a lot of people out there that are switched on, that are paying attention. But I also, I've seen a lot of examples of elected officials and corporate leaders and others who are just head in the sand, man. Right.
And that's what I think. It's one of those things. You've been there, done that. I've seen the things. I've been there, done that. Like, I could see things that would never be on quote unquote routine in law enforcement. Like, you have to be prepared for worst case scenarios. I think we get comfortable
Yeah.
And unfortunately, with our minds now and with social media, we just go from one thing to another, and we're flipping through different things that are a lot of times stupid.
Yeah.
I think the other problem we have is that government does not really connect things together well. Whether if they're talking about roads and transportation, they really should be bringing in public safety to the conversation. In the state of Florida, we have hurricanes, and so when they're building roads and they're coming up with road plans, they should really be going to public safety to say, okay, we understand I get it. There's an economic driver. 99% of the time, it's about how do we get the tractor trailers going? How do we get people to and from work? How do we get things going? But that 1%, when we need them for hurricanes, is extremely critical because you're talking about life and death situations pulling people around. So an example is in Pinellas County. Pinellas County has about 1.2 million people. Pinellas County is a peninsula. And so you got bridges that you can get in and out of, or there's a very small tip that comes into Pasco County. If there's a horrific hurricane, and the sheriff there and I talk about this, we work together with, people have plans, and this is where it's all about, we have to get all of government together to think about this. If they shut down the bridges and you really have to start pulling hundreds of thousands of people out of Pinellas, they're going to be coming into Pasco. Now you basically bottlenecked everything there. So this is things people need to start planning, like from a state level, from a federal level. Hey, how do we coordinate this? Because this is an issue. I know there's probably listeners that are all across the country going, I know exactly there's maybe an area in Nevada or there's an area in California. There's areas across the country that this same thing, but it's about connecting government together. And I think that's the problem we face is, and sometimes people don't even know about it. Like I can talk to other government officials and I get it. My world is thinking of worst case scenarios and how do we prevent or react to them. They're not in that world. They're not in space. And so I think it's bringing them in and saying, hey, guys, when you're deciding about this or you're deciding about that, think about law enforcement. You're deciding the designs of a school building or you're designing designs for this structure. Bring us in, because if you bring us in from the beginning, you're going to save those issues in the end. But then going back to your point about people not caring, they do care when something bad happens. Yeah, and then we get the 9/11 effect where that's it. We're going to change this. We're going to do that.
We need a commission.
Yeah, a commission. And we start and the worst thing is we had a commission. I will tell you this, until we fix it, this will probably be one of my biggest complaints I have. We had a commission, and the commission said one of the biggest failures was innovation and communication. Innovation, we're getting better. Like it takes individual, but communications could be, done. We can't communicate.
Are you talking about the 9/11 Commission?
Mm-hmm, the 9/11 Commission, and they said that the failure of able to communicate to each other, and I'm telling you, that failure still exists, and that's a problem. And I will say it: agencies are afraid to give up their comm system because they said, "Oh, if we give it up, then we lose control." Well, you know what? That's a fear, because I can tell you in our county, I gave up the sheriff's office communications system. We gave it to the county. So county fire, county rescue are not systems. Then the cities, before when they had former chiefs, were very reluctant. Now with the new chiefs that are in place, they're innovative. They're like, yeah, we're all going to do this. So our county and Pasco County is connected together. We're all in the same comms. But I say it needs to go further. It needs to be regional. So Tampa Bay region should be one communication. So if something happens in Tampa, Hillsborough, Pinellas, Pasco, we're all connected, because God forbid, in Uvalde, where you have a school shooter or something happens and you're sending people from all different organizations, they can't turn the radio quick enough. And I tell you, when people say, oh, you just flip this button and press 89532, when bullets are flying and things are going bad, you just want to flip from 1 to 5 and you're all in the same comms. And we're not there yet. And that's a failure that we have not overcome yet.
I love the fact that you're bringing that up. I just had a guy over at the same office we're at here. He was an emergency EOC planner for a small town in Ohio. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me that they had a record flood in his town, and it just flooded out the whole town. It was a real emergency situation. It was bad. And the banks of the river were just gushing. And so his little EOC, they were trying to deal with this, right? And the firefighters from all over the state of Ohio had come to help. Mm-hmm. And a noble gesture. They were there. But the comms were, and this was just a couple of years ago.
Right.
The comms were so diverse that what they ended up, because they had to have them out in boats, right, doing search and rescue. They ended up having to take one of the firefighters from the main, like the little town, and put them in each boat from the other counties so that they could talk to each other. Like they literally had to break up their entire fire department.
Right.
Their fire department lost all organic capability because they had to be there with the radio.
Right.
And what the hell, man? Like this long after 9/11, but I mean, they found a solution.
Right.
But that seems like a hell of a way to run a railroad when you're in a crisis.
Oh, and it's interesting. After every hurricane, everything that happens, whatever we do, all the organizations, hey, what was best case scenario? What was good? It's always comms. I mean, there's one thing, like I can tell you right now, if something happens next week, the biggest issue is going to be communication.
Yeah.
Like that, it's a no-brainer. And so I don't know why. And I think it's people want control. I have to control it. But that's the problem, is that the only way we're going to succeed is to people put the swords down, put them all down and say, look, let's work together, because you don't need to be arguing and fighting over turf, radio system. And the people who suffer the most are the citizens that we're responding to and the frontline people. And
they're the ones that have to live through it.
And it's so funny because everybody forgets. People sit in those comm centers and they sit in there, and it's during a storm or when something bad's happening, you're in a very isolated area. You're not ducking. You're not soaked in water. People forget in those rooms what it's like for the frontline person, not just even law enforcement, fire, but could be linesmen, it could be whatever they do. And those people are the ones out there. You said they're suffering because they're like, hey, what are you doing? They're screaming to each other because they can't talk on the radio to each other.
Yeah, and what that leads to, and this is what we talk to in the book, is institutional paralysis, right? That's my fear in all of this, and I saw it in almost every case study. And if we're seeing it, bad actors are seeing it because they are getting more and more adept at creating institutional paralysis. So when look at October 7, Doron told me, an IDF soldier that was on the scene, they were running right at police stations.
Right.
So think about like you guys in DC running to get to the police station, they're attacking the police station. Right. And you think about the levels of paralysis that could be created in that. I mean, that would already occur just with bad comms.
Right.
But when you layer in, bad actors, complex type situations, you could be looking at paralysis for long periods of time. What are your thoughts on, because we need to flatten the whole landscape and have this conversation. How do we talk about that? How do we talk about this with citizens? How do we talk about this with government leaders at all levels without being Chicken Little? How do we have a responsible, pragmatic conversation about, worst case October 7 style scenarios or other things with not just whole of government, but whole of nation, whole of community? You got any thoughts on that?
No, so I think the one thing is it's understanding what their perspective is on the other side of the table. So we're utilizing drones now in our sheriff's office. We follow the Constitution, we follow our state laws in place, but at the same time, drones have been very good. And, Skydio has been a great partner in the fact that, they came out during the storm. They were able to bring the drones out. So one of the things we're doing, and this is how it crossed the table, is that I understand our county commissioners, when something bad happens, it goes boom, sheriff's office will take care of it. Like that's your side of the table. But yet we need drones or we need technology. So now we're starting to say to them, hey, look, these drones are good, but also they run the fire department, so we can help you at fire department. Now it's going to, this is where it all comes together. We should go to this is where we, try to break avenues with our state Department of Transportation. Hey, look, drones are great. And you have a lot of state roads. You have I-75 that comes through our county. You have Veterans Expressway that comes through our county. Wouldn't drones be great? Because now if a crash occurs, we can get a drone up pretty quickly. We can tell you how bad that wreck is, how much you need to delay. Are you going to start diverting cars or, can you keep cars coming through? Now you can start telling the truck drivers in the trucking industry, hey, divert from this area because, there is actually a calculator. They realize when a crash occurs, how much of our economy slows down. So you start showing them that. Then you can start doing different things and say, hey, for your water department, different things, this is how we can use drones. So I think it really comes down to having those conversations with other organizations to say, this is why we need, why we need what we need for equipment wise, but why you can benefit from it also.
What? Okay. Yeah. What about communities? What about citizens like in the local communities? Let's just take again, I kind of stay on it because I think we don't talk about it a lot, but like an October 7 style attack, complex attack, say it were to happen in Pasco County, what are, how do you even start to broach this in terms of just pragmatic thought with citizens?
So I think multiple, and the one thing is nice about it. You talked about the parade earlier. Talk about things that we do at our community. We have that saying in our county. It's called "We fight as one." Like we put down our patrol cars, we put down our uniforms. It's that we're in this together with our community. Like we is an entire community. We're all in this together. So we have conversations with our community. We talk to them. We have a very large volunteer unit too. People that come in daily. A lot of times, senior citizens that they want to get out of the house, they want to help us, which impacts us tremendously. They're part of the sheriff's office. Some of the things that we're doing is kind of unique. Is that we're building out a volunteer force. Now, I know there's a lot of people that have jobs, families, they can't come in and volunteer every day. But when something bad happens, they want to grab their gun and they want to come in and help.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I'm pro Second Amendment. We live in a pro Second Amendment county. We have a lot of people with guns. A lot of people were trained either in military, law enforcement, that know how to use those guns. So what we're building up now is a volunteer unit of people that we know are not going to be there every day, but when something critical happens, we're going to call them in. They're going to help us. We're going to identify, because the last thing we ever want is one issue they had at Beslan was, and I get it, fathers were just showing up with their guns, saying we're charging in. Now, I get that feeling as a father.
Right.
Like I'm going in, but at the same time as from law enforcement, we want to coordinate because we want to know who's good and who's bad when we go in there. So that's one of the things we're building out now, and we're at the very infancy stages. And I don't think I don't know. There's organizations that volunteer sheriffs that come in and do stuff. But I think what we're talking about is a highly tactical special missions unit of people that have been really trained in whether it's previous firefighters, EMTs, people that have really good critical mission skills that can come in, because I'll tell you, our ratio of deputies, our population's boomed. We don't have enough deputies in the county to handle multiple situations. And not telling anybody secrets, it's the reality. That's why we're going to need citizens to come in to serve with us and be with us to support us if these worst case scenarios happen, like a blackout. If we have the grid go down, we absolutely need people there with guns to support our deputies and ride with our deputies, because we're going to be overwhelmed.
And this is what communities have always done. Mm-hmm. Even in Afghanistan, communities would, if you look at their micro history, there's a long history of communities working together with law enforcement or whoever, both formal and informal, right? There's a precedent for this. This isn't like radical stuff, particularly if it's done responsibly. And my thing that I've tried to put forward is you have these conversations when risk is low, and you leverage these realities when the stakes go high. Mm-hmm. Like the key is to work it like you're doing now. And one of the things that you're doing that I think is a really great best practice is this, asset inventory, is take a look at who's in the community, who's here, because if there's any kind of complex attack, it's gonna be a mass casualty. It's going to exceed scope and capacity on a range of levels. Right. So just knowing who is in the community that could step up and help with that has tremendous experience with that. Identify them ahead of time, meet them ahead of time, start to build contingency plans, build relationships. To me, don't you think that's something that we could do at scale around the country in a responsible way, bottom up?
And so you just look at, our state guard, Governor DeSantis created the state guard in Florida. That state guard has a special missions unit. And so they're statewide across the board. And so we're emulating that at a local level. I think it's critical we have to do this. My fear is because of the defund police movement. Yeah. That hurt our profession tremendously. And as much as, we're blessed in Pasco County, we're blessed in the state of Florida. We have a great governor. Now we have a phenomenal president who, they support law enforcement. The problem was we had a group of people for several years that grew up in the defund police movement. They saw that, their parents saw that. And so the issue we face is, and I can tell you, I have buddies that are cops up north. They're just waiting to get to pension, retire, and they're getting out. In Florida, we're behind the curve because people flock to come down here because they're like, I can still be in law enforcement and I'm going to be respected. I can do my job. I'm going down there. My fear, though, is in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to have a generation of kids that were born in this, and they may have that spirit to serve, and instead of doing it in local law enforcement, they're either going to go the military route or they're going to go become firefighters. But the families are going to say, do you really want to go in law enforcement? Do you remember, when during this period and people turned on law and, they tried to sue cops for doing their job? So my fear is we're going to face that as a nation. Now, how do you respond to that? How do you say, hey, how do we? So I think a big thing is technology is going to be critical in the future for public safety. That's going to alleviate, some of the workload. no matter what, we're going to have, we have to train and be blessed with great people that we are. But I think the third part is going to be, how do we respond to critical situations? And that's where strong volunteer units are going to have to be created that come in, that are trained to a level, identified, and be able to come into critical situations. Because I think, I think there's going to be a shift in law enforcement in the future. I don't think we're going to get the numbers nationwide that we were before. So we have to, especially like in the state of Florida for hurricanes, we're going to have to resolve on citizen volunteers to get up, stand up, and support to protect other people in the community.
Well, I mean, look at you, and you would know. I mean, you're looking at this problem every day. You're talking to other sheriffs.
Right.
You're talking to law enforcement leaders across the country. Mm-hmm. You guys are connected. And I think you're right. I think that concerns me too. And I have a son in law enforcement, so I worry about it as well. Mm-hmm. But I will tell you, let's just take the institutional paralysis thing into a practical look here. Look at Western North Carolina. That's where most of my people are from and still live. Right. And so when that all happened with Hurricane Helene, I mean, no one was ready for that. Right. And we can, I think they're still going through lessons learned, and I'm sure there will be things that will come out of that. But at the end of the day, like you said, scope and capacity was rapidly exceeded, right? For local law enforcement, National Guard. And I did a tour of that area with a pastor that serves my family and several other families in the area. And she saw a lot of rough stuff, man. Right. Pastor Glenda, we're going to have her on the show. And she told me, and she, with tears in her eyes, she said, Scott, if it had not been for the veterans that jumped into the fray, and she goes, I don't even know who they are. Right. They came out, they were on mule trains coming into the woods. And she said, we did not see anyone other than like our local volunteer fire department for 14 days. Right. And I know that's easy to kind of roll our eyes and think we had just turned the gas grill on. And 14 days, like you said, whether that's power grid or that is a lot of death, a lot of suffering. But the veterans were the X factor in that. Right. What are your thoughts on that as you look at that? I mean, I think it speaks to what you're talking about with this volunteer piece.
No, that's the thing. There's always, as I said, there's always going to be people born with that innate, I want to serve, I want to help other people. Yeah. And I'm not sure eventually what avenues they're going to go into, but they're going to be there. They want to, they watch these horrific things happen. They're like, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to do something. Whether it's North Carolina, whether it's Pasco, Florida, if something happens, we have to build up the volunteer. And this is where I go back to, I mean, I have some pretty radical ideas. My wife laughs at me. But honestly, I think at the high school level, there's things that we teach kids that are important. Like, hey, we want read and write, math, those type of things. There's a lot of things that curriculums just build out, and it's almost like they're just doing hours. We don't train them up to survive or be involved. And so I'll tell you, like, the one thing is they need to have a day about the criminal justice system or a week in criminal justice. Learn how the criminal justice works, because a lot of people have never been in the criminal justice system, but yet at the same time, when something happens, they're like, who do I call? Well, how does this work? So now I got to go to state attorney's office. I was a victim. How do I do that? They don't understand the process. Right. The one thing is, finally, I'm very happy in the state of Florida, they're teaching kids for a semester about finance. Yeah. Like, hey, this is how you spend your money, because that's something that's going to be important for them going forward. I think a critical lesson should be a semester training kids on, like, okay, if there's a hurricane, this is how to prepare from, this is what to do, this is how to volunteer. And we build kids up and or either do it at the high school level or do it at the college level, where we're teaching kids, hey, this is how you're going to help other people. This is how you're going to be involved.
Service?
I mean, I know. That's it. But and that's the thing. It's just like how I think people have that want to help. There's still a lot of people that have that desire to help. They just don't know what to do. And I think if we teach them how, hey, this is how you're going to incorporate, this is how you're going to be a part of it, I think that we'd be way more successful than we are now, where people just sit on their phones and they become. And I get it. It's a mental health crisis, but they become victims sitting on their couch, watching it, rather than getting up off the couch, helping that true victim who's being affected by it. Yeah, man, that's really good. You brought up something. I wanted to just go back to the 9/11 Commission real quick, because I think this is important. You brought up that one of the findings was communications, right? Mm-hmm. Another big one was intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that was an intelligence failure of epic proportions. Right. But yet, I can't help but think we walked away from 98%, according to the former CENTCOM commander, 98% of our ground intel assets in Afghanistan. Right. So not only have we had the border open,
but we've got a complete black hole. And I've heard people at the highest level of the NSC describe Afghanistan as a black hole. Mm-hmm. You think about that. What's manifested over the last 4 years when you have no eyes in the country where 9/11 originated, mm-hmm. and one of the primary findings was that was the problem.
Right. And that to me this is where it goes back to information sharing and collaboration. I could tell you, going back to the sniper incident, they had intel that, when he had, the suspect had placed a note somewhere saying that he was going to kill a cop. And we never got that information. The cop on the street had no idea that we were one of the. Now we were always nervous, thinking hey, we may be a target, but we were never a direct threat that we were being told that. I think one of the failures of the information sharing is that it goes back to what we talked about earlier. They want to vet until it's now it's intelligence. Now it's actually we have to do something about it.
Right.
Where it's no, just give us the bits and pieces so we have awareness.
Yeah.
Awareness is going to make us better, and that's the fear is that for the past 4 years we've had open borders.
Yeah.
We have no idea who's here. We have no idea what sympathizers are here. We have no idea what plans are going on, and that's where I go back to a issue with law enforcement and all public safety, with firefighters included, is that we're not in a position now to be proactive. If there was information to say, hey, just want you to be aware, this is what's going on. We're now we're clearly in a reactive mode. So, okay, if something happens, whether from a foreign actor or a person from within the United States, a domestic actor, how are we going to respond to it? But I go back to it. This is why, with our analysts, we have partnerships with our federal partners, local partners, state partners. We're always trying to share that information. And I think that's one of the things that we're constantly trying to figure out. And we're always looking for new ways. Who can give us new information? And I'll tell you, it's amazing. Basically, just having people on Twitter or social media, or on X and social media, you get information much quicker because it's even ironic. The other day when they picked a new pope, you found out more information. People are like, "There's a new pope," so I Googled new pope. Nothing came up on the news feed, but where did the information come from? Social media, because people are there filming it and sending it. And so that to us is an information gatherer too. So it's the game has changed tremendously, but people having phones, sharing information, getting things. And so the captain that you spoke to in the bus, he has a phenomenal background. He worked in the highway patrol in the state of Florida. He went up to D.C., worked there for a little bit. Now he's been with us, goes around all over the place, shares information, works on information. We have connections throughout the country.
His network's crazy.
Oh yeah, no, we are blessed to have him. He's phenomenal, and it's one of those things where we tell him keep getting us information.
He's a walking best practice for fusion at your. I'm not kidding.
Oh, I agree.
He's a walking best practice. But you know what? Also a testament to him for the work he's put in, because he knows he is.
Oh, yeah.
He knows what he has built in himself. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a real, I don't know, the amount of work that guy's put in to become that catalyst.
Right.
Because as you said, there's so much hubris and parochialism and just stovepiping that happens based on bureaucracy. Like you said, day two on the when you guys were pulling watch in D.C.
Right.
and you were pulled off because of bureaucracy. I'm afraid that's what's happening everywhere. What is your message to federal leaders, state leaders on, and again, I'm going to stay on terrorism because I think it's kind of the unspoken thing. What's your message on that in terms of what you guys need? I think you've been pretty clear, but is there anything that we haven't covered on that you want to say?
I think it's really explaining what you're doing to the citizens. And I get it. I'm an elected official. As sheriff, we're all in the state of Florida. All the sheriffs are elected. We respond. We every 4 years we're up and we report to the citizens on what we do, why we do, and they've decided they're going to keep us or not. I get that there's elected officials, whether it's county commissioner, the state legislature, governor, federal, Congress. Understanding and if we put money towards public safety, they still get the win out of it. So, and I get it. In the election, you have to explain why you're doing what you're doing, why you're spending that money, and the citizens will vote for you. Well, if you can say to your citizens, hey, you know what? I know everybody, I know a library is really nice, and I know everybody likes a library, but let me explain the situation. We have much bigger priorities, because of a hurricane situation. We have to be prepared for hurricanes. So we have to use this money for this. Or, you know what? There's very violent situations going on. So we're going to buy we're gonna create a tactical medical school that we're gonna train people through, and we're gonna train high school kids in it, and we're gonna train regular citizens can go through it, but we're gonna train our community in tactical
to
stop the bleed, exactly.
Yeah.
But we're not going to buy the library. But I hope you understand that, and I hope you vote for me in the next election. If they would do that, I think we can start shifting things that are more plausible, because the library. Libraries are nice, especially for parents with young kids. You take them there for a little bit and everything's nice. But the grand scheme is we all buy our books somewhere else. You go on Amazon, you go on different things. The idea and the concept, so if we're trying to find ways, and I get it for elected officials, they want to win elections. That's the game of the game. Like, you want to win so you can make the most benefit in the community. Well, the most benefit in the community sometimes is explaining why you're partnering with other organizations and where that money is going to be used towards, rather than to say, I created a new park. Let me tell you how great this park is. But reality, people who built the community, the developers, they can pay for the park themselves. You don't have to use taxpayer dollars for it. The taxpayer dollars should be going to make our community safer, because even the Stop the Bleed program, we have crashes in every community. There's a crash. There's always car crashes. Unfortunately, there's always car crashes. Yeah. And even in a car crash, if people around in that who are 2 or 3 cars back, who saw the car crash, somebody's bleeding, if that person's already been trained and Stop the Bleed, they're going to save that life way before fire rescue or sheriff's office can get there. And I think that makes us even more effective as a community, because you know what? That person who possibly could have bled out, I bet you their family would have wished that the money was spent to train somebody than on something else.
So well said. And we fight as one. Like, is it we fight as one? We fight as one. And that what a community. I mean, just our whole through line here is human connection in this show, and that's exactly it, man. Community is at the. Even Sebastian Junger says that whether the United States survives or thrives is largely going to be dependent on our communities, And I think that's right. I want to go back to the thing you said about vet, which is oftentimes what the federal government, IC, intelligence community tends to do. I just appreciate you saying that, because, one of the things that a lot of the veterans have encountered since the collapse in Afghanistan, when we had Pineapple Express and other groups, was that we found ourselves on the phone with, previously vetted and highly vetted individuals who are now on the run or in isolation. And, we're talking to them on our Macs and iPhones, on Signal. And none of us want that. None of us ask for that. But at the same time, like you said, we have a duty to report, a duty to warn. Right. And this has been going on for 4 years. And oftentimes when we pass it to the IC, the intelligence community, it's the eye roll. It's like, what's your source?
Right.
Well, I can't tell you that. Well, I need to talk to them. They're not going to talk to you because you left them.
Right.
They don't want to talk to you, man. Like, they're talking to me because I'm paying their rent.
Right.
Or I'm paying for their visa or whatever. And we can't seem to get our head around that institutionally. Like, it is a shit show. I agree. I don't like it. I think this stuff would much better belong in the IC. But to your point, we live in a new era where a lot of anthills have been kicked over.
Right.
A lot of institutional anthills, and now we're looking at realities where veterans and citizens and, frankly, communities are kind of forming around all that craziness, but they're talking to each other.
Right.
And I think that communication, as you go back to, is not just formal comms, but it's how do we lash up with these informal networks that even during the hurricane, you and I were talking, granted, we mostly just stayed out of the way, but you knew that there was a veteran network there if you needed it.
Right. So I think you hit a couple good points. One is, it's interesting. So the viewers, I don't have my vest on right now, my Kevlar. We have a mandatory wear policy in the Pasco Sheriff's Office. If you're in uniform, you're wearing a Kevlar. So as soon as I'm out here, I got my Kevlar, I'm going to throw on top of this. But the reason we do that is because whether you're the sheriff, whether you're undersheriff, majors, captains, colonels, you have to know what it's like to be on the front lines. Our analysts in the sheriff's office know what it's like to be on the front lines because they're in constant communication with the frontline deputy. They're actually they're physically out there with them, or they're right on the phone and they hear the calls and they see what's going on. I think a lot of times we have a lot of people that are analysts that just sit in a very controlled environment, have never been boots on the ground or never been in that situation where they're hearing what's going on, never realize the urgency of what's happening. And so I think that is a big issue. And it's like, look, and I think if they learn that, what it's like to be that person on the ground, they would realize, I don't need to take 25, 30 days to vet this information, to make sure it's correct. Hey, I'm just going to feed you and tell you up front, asterisk it, hey, you know what? This is what we're hearing. I can't validate it, but I'm letting you hear that. And so even our community, it's about building that trust, that we fight as one, building that trust where people say, if I give you information, hey, and the sheriff's office, hey, give us information. Now there's been people, and it's not even about terror from our standpoint, a lot of drug houses. Oh, there's drug dealing going on. This is what's happening. If those people give us information, we don't sit there and say, how'd you validate that? How did you give us all of your sources?
Right.
Give us, we just say, hey, what do you have? Okay, thanks. We're going to build off that. But then we go back to them afterwards and say, hey, just want to let you know, this is what we found out. There's not something going on, but this was happening. Or, yeah, you heard that flashbang at 2:00 in the morning? That's because SWAT went in there and hit the drug house. Thank you so much for your tip. Your information led to search warrants and arrest warrants. And that's I think the feedback is the unfortunate side is those analysts, and the analysts are critical in any organization, but they better not forget who they're serving. And the person they're serving is the person who's on that front line, who bullets may be flying at them. Decisions have to be made in a split second. So, you don't have to vet things out and sit there and drink your coffee and make sure your lunch is at the proper time. Get them the information. They're smart people. Those people on the front line are smart people. And it goes back to what you said about the hurricanes too. We built that trust in our community. So when something's going on, we tell them, hey, what's happening? And if they can get comms to us and say, hey, just want to let you know, this is what's going on. So there was an issue with gas tankers. Gas tankers were coming in from all over the place because there was no fuel, and they were ending up places, and there was almost like mini riots at locations. We had actually have people call us and say, hey, just want to let you know, I saw a tanker at this location. They're driving up, US 19. They're coming to this location. We say, thank you very much. We would send deputies, lights, and sirens to find that tanker. So before they got to the gas station, we can control everything down and monitor everything.
That's a great example. That's a great contextual example of how that can work, that private-public partnership, because I think we are in an unprecedented era of private-public partnership. We just are.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the problems are so complex, they often exceed scope and capacity of institutions to handle them, at least in the beginning. And so a lot of you have reached out to me after the Gathering Storm has come out, after Sarah's been on the show, or I've been on Sean's show, saying, how do I help, right? What can I do? One of the things I think, Sheriff Nocco, and I'd love to get your take on it, I think a lot of it is forming communities of practice around problems. Mm-hmm. We have things like Signal. It doesn't have to be on Signal. It could just be in an open chat. But, and you don't have to necessarily be a veteran. Like you could be a first responder. You could just be someone who's relevant to the problem. Right. Or who has an unyielding desire to help solve the problem, to start to form communities. And they can be virtual communities around. It can be around homelessness. It can be around hurricane preparedness. It can be around fentanyl. But I know for a fact that I've watched how you lead. And when communities do that pragmatically and responsibly, and they bring diverse thought and capability around a problem, but it's an informal starfish kind of setting, but it's self-organizing and relatively useful. I have to think that there are leaders like you out there that are more than happy to see that happen.
Oh yeah, no,
at a grassroots level.
We love the ham radio operators.
Oh boy,
they're like
rock stars.
Exactly, and that's the funny thing is that people are like, oh, they gotta, they have it. That's their little club and all. I'll tell you, when it hits the fan,
they're the first.
You want them in, like you want them on there, and it can be people that fly drones. Hey, that's great that you got a hobby of fly drones. We want you, like, hey, when bad things happen, we're going to call you to say, hey, we need your help. And as I said, we're building out this unit, and I tell people, look at our Facebook page, and we're going to push, in the next couple of months, we're going to get the information out there because we want to organize it to an extent that we're going to be able to communicate with people when we need them to come in. But you're right, it doesn't have to be somebody who is a veteran or in public safety. It could be somebody who, how to chop down trees, and we'll train, and like, unfortunately with the government, you have to have technical training, and we'll put you some training, but clearing roads is just as critical sometimes than it is protecting the gun store, because you got to make sure we get those roads clear to get people through. 100%.
And, so my take on it is forming communities of practice around problem sets. If it includes terrorism, fine. But you don't need permission to do that. Like that's a collaborative kind of thing that we've learned, honestly, as a veteran community since the collapse in Afghanistan. We came together around, but we've collaborated around the fires in West Maui. Mm-hmm. We've collaborated around relief in Western North Carolina, working with you all in the hurricanes and and even the terrorism problem set now. forming communities to just talk with law enforcement and offer help, you know? So I hope that people watching this will consider that is these communities of practice, grassroots kind of things, but informal, formal relationships. It's got to be responsibly done. My last question.
Well, I was going to say, let me just handle that real quick. That's a great point because it goes back to the point that everybody, and we love it when people want to get off the couch and help.
And they want to help.
But especially, I always go back to hurricanes because that's unfortunately in Florida, that's our bread and butter. That's what we do constantly. We're constantly getting better. We don't want people just showing up because when they show up and it's not organized, then
that's not helping.
Yeah, that's not helping. Yeah, that's just flooding a situation. So that's why with us, we're trying to create that organization because we want hundreds of people to come out to help. We 100%. Want that. We just got to make sure it's organized because we've seen in other situations where people start going into situations, and now you're helping, you're basically rescuing those that we're trying to rescue others, and so that's what we're trying to. But we love the attitude of we're all going to come together. But I would say, like with our sheriff's office, if you live in Pasco, you want to help, we're going to work it through the Pasco sheriff's office because hey, we want you, we're going to utilize you. Yeah. We just got to coordinate efforts.
100%. And again, it just goes back to the old adage, you build trust when risk is low and you leverage it when the stakes are high. So communities of practice around wicked problems are best built when the risk is lower. And then you're able to leverage it when things fall apart. This podcast is all about human connection. You demonstrate it in how you've built not just your department, but how you interact with the community. Your slogan, "We Fight as One," which I think is just a model. I wrote a book called "Nobody's Coming to Save You," and in that book, I talk about as a Green Beret looking at the social conditions in this country right now. I think we are in an unprecedented time of distraction and disengagement, but also distrust and division. I feel like almost a trance-like state, as Ivan Tyrrell says, where it's a churn that's happening, and it really, in my mind, is turning us against one another in a lot of ways. We're looking at the Republican or the Democrat as the enemy versus this churn, this set of conditions that we live in now where it's tribal. Right. And I'm wondering, you talked about how it's gotten more violent, the calls that you get. 1 minute it's just a Jerry Springer moment, but then it goes to tone. Right. Are you seeing this? Are you seeing a change in the emotional temperature on the street? And can you talk about it?
Yeah, so I will say clearly the defund the police movement had an impact on every community. And I can see it in Pasco. Like you can see where, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can tell you the feeling is that people are more likely to be violent against law enforcement. They're more likely to bow up to us. They're more likely to swing at us. We just had the other day, stolen motorcycle, ran, turned back. The deputy was opening up his door. He runs into the deputy, hits the deputy. The deputy gets hurt. They're just more prone to violence. That's the feeling that we're all getting out there. And so I'll tell you, we tell our deputies, as long as you're professional and you're doing what is right, we will back you to the bitter end. And so we want them to go out there and be proactive. We don't want them to sit underneath a tree and say, oh, they're not going to support me. We will support you. As long as you're professional and you're doing what is right, we will back you to the bitter end, because unfortunately, the culture in this country for several previous administration years was turn on cops. Cops are bad, all this stuff. And you couldn't do your job. But I can tell you in our community, our citizens were not they were like, no, we want the cops to enforce the law. We want you out there. Yeah. And that's what made us in the state of Florida different. But it also has an emotional side for our members. So we have a family support network. Right. We have 4 full-time chaplains. We have other reserve chaplains that come in. And because that is stressful on them, it's stressful on their family. And so we want to help alleviate that because, we don't want that. The worst case scenario is to have deputies that are just so mad and so angry and they go out in the street and they do something stupid. Right. We want them to always be at that point. So, we want them to be better off when they retire than they are when they started their career, both mentally, physically, and spiritually. And so those are the things we work on with them. And going to our community, we tell people like, hey, look, we may not agree on everything, but at the same time there's a foundation in this country and our state and our community. We're going to uphold the law. So understand that, we're going to make sure this community's safe. And I think those are those fundamental principles that people go back to. And I think it's like, if people like protesters will protest to a point. And if they realize they can go a little further, they're going to keep going a little further. If they think, if I throw a brick, what are they going to do to me? And they let throw a brick and they don't, okay, now I could throw a brick. Now I'm going to start burning the building. When are they going to stop? And so in the sheriff's office, we have an understanding that if somebody sits in the middle of the road, our deputy walks up to him and says, "This is against the law. You have to, go back to where you came from." If they do not get up and walk back to the sidewalk, they're immediately arrested. Like there's no hesitation. That deputy will be disciplined if they do not arrest that person. And we tell them on several reasons. One, if you don't handle that situation, other people are going to start emulating it, and people are going to start doing things. Like if somebody comes up to a deputy and starts grabbing a deputy, if that deputy doesn't take him to the ground and arrest him, other people are going to say, if I could push a deputy, I'm going to keep going. The other reason with the arrests on the street is because if, God forbid, there's a fire rescue coming and they're having an ambulance and there's somebody's life is in danger, but they're blocking a road, that family's going to look at the sheriff's office and say, "Why did you not clear the road? My loved one died because you didn't handle it."
Right.
And then the other part is the community starts feeling, if this protester could sit in the road, what other crimes are you allowing to go on and you're not handling it? So I think the problem we have in our country is, one, it was the defund the police movement was critical. The other one too is you had elected mayors and elected city councils and elected governors or legislatures in other states that allowed law enforcement or basically tied their hands behind their back and said, "You're not enforcing things, you're not doing things." That just made it even worse. And so now people are going, how far can I push it? There has to be boundaries. There has to be lines in the sand. And so unfortunately, the violence that we see that we think, we can see this, we think it's people watching things from outside this area that go, in Chicago, this gets away with it. Or in Portland, Oregon, they get away with this. Well, in Florida, you're not going to get away with it. And so that's the one thing that we see the violence, we've seen an uptick, but at the same time is we're telling our members, hold the line, because the 750,000 residents in our community want us to protect them.
Do you also, and I 100% respect that, and I see you guys doing it, and I think it's spot on. Do you also think it's because of the way you engage the community? I mean, like you guys, like you're out there, you're engaged, and the community feels, I think, certainly in Pasco, feels part of it, of what you're doing.
Oh, I think they know they're part of the team.
Yeah.
Like that's how we fight as one. They know, and as I said, our community outreach is incredible. The deputies that we have members that they go out in the community, they're interacting with kids, they're interacting with families, they show up at events. And it's a lot of times it's with our canines. We have a large canine unit. We have 55 canines in our sheriff's office, whether they're gun dogs, they're drug dogs, they're SWAT dogs. They find the microchips for child pornography that people put in the walls, human remain dogs, live-fire dogs. They were all donated by people in the community. Wow. All these dogs, and so if anybody's a handler out there, and these dogs are very expensive, but every one of them was donated by somebody in the community. Amazing. Because their support for the sheriff's office, because they're part of the team. And so I can tell you, our deputies, even in the worst of times, they go into restaurants and people are thanking them for what they do. But it's because we also, from the first moment somebody's hired with the sheriff's office, they understand, treat our citizens with respect. Now, if somebody steps out of line, they need to be handled. You handle business and you take care of business, because everybody else will realize, you stepped out of line, we want that handled. But at the same time no matter where you go or what you do, you treat people with respect, because we work for them. And I always tell people, when times were at their worst, our community circled the wagons around us, protect us, and loved us. And I thank God always, because that's kind of the community I grew up in Philadelphia, and it's been lost up there. Yeah. But I could tell you, in the community I'm in now that we serve in Pasco, they surround us with love. And it's funny, I see that American flag right behind you every time when I'm talking. And it gives me chills, because that's what America is supposed to be. Yeah. And that's what America is all about. And I can tell you, in Florida, we still have that.
I don't know if you know this, but that's a flag that Legend pulled from the flames in Afghanistan that was being burned by the Taliban. And he pulled 5 out. Right. And one of them he donated to us at the play. Right. And I put it up there because, kind of like what you said about Philadelphia, I think that this country is still going. It's still strong. It's still built on an extremely strong foundation, but it's been scuffed up, and we've got to find a way to get back connected. Right. Whether that's federal to state and local, whether that's community to law enforcement, it's just the connection piece, I think, is what's missing. Right. Anything that we didn't cover, Chris, before we wrap up here? We've covered a lot of ground. Anything that we didn't say, just on your take on leadership, threats, anything that you want to put out there as a message? So
the big message, and it goes back to what you said about hope. Our country, we've been scuffed up. We've had some rough patches. We're not united like we were founded on. And that foundation is actually, biblical too. The fact that we are one nation under God. And as long as we remember that, we're going to be okay. When we forget that, and I was listening to somebody talk about, there was somebody came from France years after our nation was founded, and they said, what makes America unique? And it wasn't the fact that, we have a democracy. It wasn't the fact that the president, is term limited. It wasn't the fact that, our government structure. It was found in our churches. And it was found in the freedom that was spoke upon in our churches. And that's the one thing we have to remember. We have a lot of people that come to this country, but they came to this country because they want to be Americans. And we have to remember that America is America, and we do not bend to be to be other parts of the world. Yeah. We're unique. America is unique. We should not, don't be ashamed by that. Don't be upset by that. Be proud of it. We're unique. We're what the freedoms that people wish they had, we have here. We should not bow down and give up those freedoms. We should not forget who we are. And that's the one thing that makes us who we are and makes us, special. And it's okay to say that we are special because we are blessed to be in this country. Yeah. And we should not forget about that. And it all started because we were founded as one nation under God.
Yeah. And rule of law is part of that.
Absolutely.
All right. Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And thank you, everybody, for watching this episode of the Scott Mann Podcast. Really enjoyed having Chris with us. If you liked the episode, share it with someone that could use it. We'd love for you to rate it and make sure that you subscribe and encourage others to do that. This is a grassroots movement that is continuing to tell the stories and find ways to connect better as humans and build a stronger country and a stronger world. So thanks for what you do, and we'll see you on the rooftop.